Hey, Foundations 2 students, it's Mrs. Patterson with some art history to get you started on your first Learning from Home art project. We are going to base this project off of the art history period of pop art. So just a little background information on pop art. Pop art started with the New York artists Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, James Rosenquist, and Klaus Oldenburg, all of whom drew on popular imagery and were actually part of an international phenomenon. So when you're thinking about pop art, you might also be familiar with the term pop music. Kind of the same idea, popular art, popular music. After abstract expressionism, pop artists wanted to reintroduce identifiable imagery. So where abstract expressionism wanted to remove anything identifiable, pop artists want to do the opposite. So remember how I've said that most art movements are a direct opposition to the art movement prior. So pop artists draw their inspiration from mass media and popular culture. So advertising, magazines, even tabloids. The subject matter became far from traditional high art themes of morality and mythology and classic history. So pop artists celebrate commonplace objects and people of everyday life, in this way seeking to elevate popular culture to the level of fine art. Pop art has become one of the most recognizable styles of modern art. It started in the 1950s and continued until the late 1970s. And one of the focuses of pop art was to find a mechanical means of reproduction so that more than one of an artwork was available. When you think about magazines, there's thousands and thousands of copies of one magazine, and inside that magazine there might be one advertisement, and there are thousands and thousands of copies of that one advertisement. So they're kind of trying to do the same thing, and they do this through a mechanical means of reproduction of their artwork. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the artists specifically involved in the pop art movement. One of the most well-known artists from pop art is probably Andy Warhol. Even if you don't know the name, you will likely recognize some of his artworks. Andy Warhol was born in 1928 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and died in 1987 in New York City. He was one of the most successful and highly paid commercial illustrators in New York even before he began to make art that would go into galleries. He worked with a lot of screen printing as his mechanical means of reproduction, and his images of Marilyn Monroe, Campbell's soup cans, and lots of other celebrities of the time quickly became kind of the cover art for the pop art movement. Almost everyone, even now, knows these images. Andy Warhol grew up in poverty. He was from an Eastern European immigrant family and eventually rises to fame as a fine artist. And that's kind of the whole idea behind pop art, is to take something everyday and ordinary and turn it into something high class and celebrity. And I have to mention this here because I love this. But to continue with the idea of his celebrity and his popular culture, Andy Warhol was even used in the Men in Black 3 movie. You might recognize this as an undercover Men in Black agent. So if you've seen this movie, he behaves kind of oddly, and Andy Warhol became known for his kind of strange mannerisms and voice and just was kind of a weird dude, but hey, he's an artist. So Warhol's early commercial illustration really showed that he was leaning towards the popular image and learning to manipulate those images. His drawings were often comic, decorative, whimsical, and a little bit lighter than the cold and impersonal mood of his pop art images. He does a series called Death and Destruction. At the time in New York City, there were a lot of, it was kind of a trendy thing in tabloids to have pictures of these accident scenes and things like that. And so what he would do is he would take the pictures from the headlines, the photographs from the headlines, and he would create artwork out of them. It's kind of a gruesome sort of thing to do. But we're going to look at a few of his more famous images, beginning with this one titled Marilyn, sometimes referred to as Marilyn's because he did many of these. and many other images very similar to this of other celebrities. And he was a friend of Marilyn Monroe's, and he created 3 Marilyn Monroe screen print portfolios in 1967, which was a few years after she passed away in 1962. The portfolio of 10 screen prints was one of the first prints Warhol printed and distributed through Factory Editions, New York. The name of this company references to Warhol's studio known as the Factory. He initially began depicting the actress in the Marilyn Diptych, 1962, which is shortly after her death. And this is a silkscreen painting which contains 50 images of the actress, all taken from the 1953 film Niagara. Okay, so if we were in class, we would be doing a DAIJ of this image. So how would you describe this image? So you might say it's colorful, it shows an image of Marilyn Monroe. Again, remember you're trying to describe this to me as though I can't see this image. I have no idea what image you're talking about. So those are some things you might use to describe it. If you knew the size, you could tell me the size. You could tell me the name of it, how it was made, things like that. What are elements and principles are used in this image? How would you interpret this piece? What do you think his intention was in creating this image? Do you like it? Why or why not? All right, so a couple art elements and principles that I see used in this piece are obviously color. There's lots of color in this piece, right? There's also lines used to create her face. You could say value, you could say shape, you could say space with the overlapping of colors. There's lots of different art elements and principles that you can use in this interpretation. And let's see, to interpret this piece, I would probably say that he was probably trying to remember this particular actress. And also, just like with everything else in pop art, he's trying to create fine art out of an image that people of that time would have seen regularly, all the time. Pictures of Marilyn Monroe, she's very famous, so they're going to be seeing a lot of that. So he's trying to create fine art out of that. Okay, and then as far as whether or not you like it, that's totally up to you. I actually really like this image because it's so colorful. Okay, next up is the Campbell's soup can. Yes, a soup can. When he first exhibited Campbell's soup cans in 1962, the canvases were displayed together on shelves like products in a grocery aisle. And at that time, Campbell's sold 32 soup varieties. So each one of these 32 canvases corresponds to a different flavor. And even though Campbell's soup cans resembles the mass-produced printed advertisements by which Warhol was inspired, its canvases are hand-painted. So he's not using the silk screening technique yet. And the fleur-de-lis pattern ringing around the edge of each can's bottom edge is hand-stamped. So that's where he's putting in that means of mechanical reproduction. And Warhol mimicked the repetition and uniformity of advertising by carefully reproducing the same image across each individual canvas. So again, he wasn't doing the silk screening process yet, so it wasn't printed. It was hand painted, and he did it with almost complete exactness. He varied only the label on the front of each can to distinguish them by their variety, and he is quoted to have said of Campbell's soup, "I used to drink it. I used to have the same lunch every day for 20 years, I guess. The same thing over and over again." Excuse me. Towards the end of 1962, shortly after he completed Campbell's soup cans, Warhol turned to the photo silkscreen process. This is a printmaking technique originally invented for commercial use. It will become his signature medium and link his art-making methods more closely to those of advertisements. I don't think art should be only for the select few, he claimed. I think it should be for the mass of the American people. All right, so what do you think of this piece? How would you describe it? What art elements or principles, are included in this piece? How would you interpret this piece? What do you think his intention was in creating it? And of course, do you like it? Yes or no? Why or why not? All right, so to describe this, you could say it's a Campbell soup can. Even now, almost anybody would recognize that image in their brain and be able to think of what a Campbell soup can looks like. You might say it's an old school Campbell soup can, a little bit different with the red and the white label and the fleur-de-lis around the bottom edge. You could even go so far as to say what type of soup it is. Is it chicken noodle? Is it tomato? You tell me. Okay, these were fairly large as well. All right, let's see. Art elements and principles that are included in this artwork. There's obviously line in the lettering to create the shape of the can. So lines create shapes. So that could also work as your shape art element. Color, obviously, in the red and the gold colors on the label. Value can be shown where the can appears to be more three-dimensional and the highlights and shadows at the top part of the can. And lots of other things that we could include in there. It's pretty much symmetrically balanced except for the lettering. Anyway, lots of different things you can use on that one. Interpretation. Again, his idea is to bring these mass produced images and create them to be high-class artworks, fine art. So that's going to be his intention with pretty much any artwork that he's created. And then, do you like it? Yes or no? That's up to you. It's not my favorite artwork of his. So I personally just don't really enjoy it. It's not colorful enough for me. Okay, so let's move on and talk about our next artist. This artist will be our jumping off point for our project this week. His name is Roy Lichtenstein, and he was born in 1923 in New York and died in 1997 in New York as well. He was one of the first American pop artists to achieve widespread recognition, but he also received quite a bit of criticism for his artwork as well. Not everyone liked it, and some people would accuse him of simply copying the work of others. His early work ranges widely in style and subject matter and displays considerable understanding of modernist painting. Lichtenstein would often maintain that he was as interested in the abstract qualities of his images as he was in their subject matter. So in 1961, he begins painting what are some of his best-known works inspired by comic strips, and this is where people start to heavily criticize his work. He is accused mostly of lack of originality and, again, just copying the work of others. His images, however, have also become some of the best-known pop art images in the world. In the early 1960s, he was often casually accused, like I said, of merely copying his pictures from cartoons, but his method involves some considerable alteration of the source images. So he's not really just full-on copying, but he would get them straight from comic strips. So the extent of those changes and the artist's rationale for introducing them has long been part of a discussion of his works. So just kind of, is he really interested in producing pleasing artistic compositions, or in shocking his viewers with the garish impact of popular culture? Or is he just trying to make a name for himself? Are these really artworks if you're kind of copying what somebody else has done? These are discussions that continue to this day. And in fact, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was an artist who would go around and she would take photographs of other people's artwork, but she would say her photograph was her artwork. And so that kind of became this weird trend in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there was a lot of talk about, is this really new artwork or is this just a copy of somebody else's? So just kind of an interesting thing to think about along with this. Okay, so Lichtenstein's emphasis on methods of mechanical reproduction, particularly through his signature use of Ben-Day dots, highlighted one of the central lessons of pop art. So he is taking a stencil. He didn't paint each and every dot by hand. He would use stencils with perforated dot patterns, and he'd brush his paint across the top of the stencil, and the colors dropped through as perfect stencils, and that was how he got the mechanical means of replication or reproduction. So let's look at this artwork. This one is called Wham! And we're going to critique this one together again. So how would you describe this painting? What art elements or principles are included in this painting? How would you interpret this painting? What do you think was his intention behind creating this artwork? And then, of course, do you like it? Yes or no? Why or why not? All right, so you might say there's a fighter jet, there's a two-frame comic strip, there's the word wham written in kind of bubble comic-y style letters. You could say the reds and the yellows and just the different colors that make it up. Just describe it to me as though I can't see it. And analyze, what are elements and principles do you see? Obviously there's color, there's line and the creation of the letters, there's shape everywhere, everything has a pretty bold black line around it. Again, that's pretty typical of comic book style. Let's see. I don't know that I would necessarily say there's texture or form. There's definitely some space with overlapping. There's some contrast with your colors there, the cool colors of the background and the ship versus the warm colors of the Wham. All right, obviously there's emphasis on the Wham. We could go on and on. There's lots of the different art elements and principles used here. Okay, and again with the interpretation, it's going to be pretty much the same for most pop artists. They're trying to take these everyday images and make them fine art. So same kind of thing here. I actually really like this image. I like the comic book style. I like that heavy black line around the edges. Anyway, I just really like this one. Okay, so let's talk about your project for this next week. And it might go longer than this next week. You are going to create a comic strip. First off, you need to come up with your own character. And I'm going to type all of this up and put it in the classroom so that you can look at these questions as you're making decisions. So some questions you might want to ask yourself about your main character. What kind of person is this? Are they a superhero, a villain, a normal, everyday person? All of these things have been included in comic strips. Is it a dog or a cat? Think like Garfield, things like that. Do they have an alter ego, a costume, a disguise? Create a sketch of your character. Look at some comic strips online. You don't have to draw realistically or super detailed. I only ask that you not use stick figures. Where do they live? What is their backstory or origin story if they have one? What will be happening in your comic strip? So you're going to draw a cover as if you were creating a comic book. The cover should include your character, a title, and an image that gives us an idea of something that might happen in your story. You're welcome to use any supplies that you might have on hand, pencil, pen, if you have any crayons or colored pencils or markers at home, or even paint, feel free to use those too. I'm hoping you have some blank paper to draw this on, but if you don't, whatever you have will be fine so long as it is that regular size of paper, that like 8 by 10, nothing smaller than a piece of notebook paper. On another sheet of paper, you are going to draw 3 frames. So first, create 3 squares. You can just draw these on the paper, or you can cut them out separately. These squares need to be at least 6 inches by 6 inches. Okay, so 6-inch square, 3 of those. In those 3 frames, you're going to show your story, or at least a portion of your story. And again, you can use any supplies that you have on hand. You'll be taking pictures of your work and sending it to me every Wednesday and Friday so that I can see you're making some progress on your work. If you don't have a way to do that, please email me, npatterson@apamail.org, so we can try to figure something out. All right, guys, that's it for at least the rest of this week. I will see where your progress is on Friday, and on next Monday, we'll either have a new assignment or we will continue our work on this one. Stay healthy, stay safe. Hopefully we'll see you guys soon. Have a great rest of your week.